Hi everyone, my name is Nick Baronsky, and thank you for joining me today. I want to tell you a story. Once upon a time, there was a company, and like all companies, this company had numbers, and these numbers needed to be correct. The rulers of the land, the managers, the auditors, the stockholders, they would be very upset if these numbers were not correct. So what's a company to do? Well, the answer was obvious. They would create an Excel spreadsheet. It was flexible, cheap to create, easy to use, a perfect piece to their puzzle. And like a magic beanstalk, the Excel spreadsheet grew, and it grew, and it grew some more. But it's okay. The numbers, after all, are correct, and the Excel spreadsheet proved it, right? Regardless, the magic Excel spreadsheet went around and around before finally being stored in the castle archives, in a local folder or a shared drive. The lords and the ladies were able to access the archives whenever they liked, and they were able to use these numbers to make strategic decisions about the future of their company. And as time went on, they could easily rinse and repeat this process, and everybody lived happily ever after. Isn't that a nice story? Unfortunately, this is rarely how the story plays out. So let's bring our story back from the fantasy genre and see what it looks like in nonfiction. So a company has numbers that need to be correct, so they create an Excel spreadsheet. It's cheap and easy, and it grows until it's out of control, becoming completely unmanageable. And the situation gets worse as it changes hands. It's saved to a local folder or a shared drive, but nobody seems to be able to find these reconciliations. After all, it's not exactly a secure castle vault. Auditors get their questions answered, or do they? Maybe? And while I'm sure management would love to make strategic decisions, most of the time is spent actually trying to get the auditors these answers. And just when you think you have the process streamlined and you can rinse and repeat, you likely have to start again with new personnel. The reality is, companies go through the reconciliation process as best as they're able, but even under ideal circumstances where they avoid all of these potential pitfalls, how many live happily ever afters do you hear about? How many, wow, what an efficient reconciliation cycle we just had? Now, the best I hear is we're surviving. I don't know how we managed to do it, but we did. It's the message of a company just getting by. So unfortunately, the hard truth is this isn't just a common story, it is the common story for the overwhelming majority of clients, and not just in the financial close, but across all financial processes and organizations. And we hear this story in the financial close all the time, and we consistently and readily recommend Oracle's Account Reconciliation Cloud Service Solution, or ARCS, in these situations. But as a product manager, I've had more opportunities than most to hear about what's happening outside of the financial close domain. And guess what? It's not just us. These issues and concerns about the credibility and efficiency of a reconciliation process goes beyond the financial close. Look at these quotes. Auditors don't trust us. The businesses don't trust us. You'd think you're talking to an accountant, but we're not. These are quotes coming from the FP&A teams. So for any financial processes, the reconciliation process is at least a thorn in their side, if not a critical point of failure and costly liabilities, and companies simply cannot afford to be wrong in their reconciliations. They must take steps towards becoming trustworthy and compliant. Which brings us to the heart of our topic today. Can we help? We've done it with the financial close work streams. Can the success of our magic bullet ARCS be replicated in other processes? Can we give them a storybook ending? Let's start by talking about ARCS. This is a common slide from the Oracle Partner Trainings, and it can often be seen in Cloud Customer Connect webinars as well. And in many ways, it's a very good slide. It's an effective, evocative visual of a streamlined financial close process. It shows all the puzzle pieces fitting perfectly together. There's a process, and there's a product to answer it. But in other ways, this slide is limiting and limited. It shows a restrictive view of the tool set. It does show clear linear progression, but it doesn't encourage deviation, and this ultimately stifles creativity, and it restricts the way we think about the Oracle toolset. So the challenge is if we can see if ARCS can fit somewhere else, in a different puzzle altogether. Is there a home for ARCS outside of the financial close? But before we can move outside, let's talk about ARCS inside the financial close. What does ARCS actually do? What services does the tool provide? Well, the tempting easy answers are it replaces Excel worksheets, it reconciles balance sheets, maybe it reconciles the whole general ledger against the respective subledgers. And these are all true. But that doesn't explain what the key benefits are. So here are my criteria and why I think ARCS is, in fact, a good solution for the financial close. First, ARCS provides a comprehensive and centralized solution. All aspects of the reconciliation can be found in one place. You'll hear descriptions like it's a one-stop shop, it's a central repository. The point is, it houses everything a reconciler could need. ARCS also creates accountability through the assignment of tasks, which we call workflow. It indicates a specific person or team as the responsible party, and not just once, but it will continue to remind them. And we've noticed that when things have your name on it, it tends to get done faster and more accurately. The tool also provides visibility into the live status of the current reconciliation process. So for example, a manager can see both individually as well as a whole where the team is in the reconciliation cycle. It then gives you the information to evaluate the bottlenecks. The next key benefit is it provides traceability, which refers to the ability to not only follow the changes to the data, but also changes to how the reconciliation is completed itself. This gives ARCS 2 thumbs way up for auditors. It also provides an easy method of communication among the responsible parties, preparers, reviewers, system administrators, and it documents all of their communication and stores them on a per reconciliation basis for future referencing. And last but certainly not least, ARCS allows companies to refocus on the high priority and high risk reconciliations through out-of-the-box rules as well as customized rules. But most of you already know these benefits. These are the buzzwords, the words that you hear in the sales cycle, and in fact, is what you actually experience in the solution if you've implemented ARCS in the financial close. But are these benefits limited to the financial close? Do these not apply to planning and budgeting reconciliations? Or how about profitability and costing reconciliations? Of course you want these things. Of course these are the characteristics that you want regardless of what reconciliation process you are using. And therefore, we need to shift our thinking of the Oracle tools. If we understand the bones of our product solutions, the foundational benefits achieved through their implementation, it opens up a world of opportunity to solve some real problems that we may not have even known. I believe that ARCS can offer strong solutions to the problems and reconciliations beyond the financial close. So let's take a look at a potential example, reconciliations in profitability and cost management. When I first started exploring this idea of using Oracle's account reconciliation tool outside of the financial close, profitability and cost management wasn't the first product that came to mind. But after discussing the PCM reconciliation process with Alithya product manager Alex Milinarzak, this quickly became the obvious candidate to explore. And this is because there are several similarities that translate well across the processes. To start, both are completed on a regular basis. Since the timing was predictable, this means that there is an opportunity for standardization. Additionally, both processes suffer from multiple disconnected sources of information. Both processes also have limited built-in functionality in the originating tools. General ledgers have a poor reconciliation capabilities, and the ones they do have don't really stack up to what auditors are expecting and require. And there are similar problems with PCM. There are reconciliation tools, but they're a little bit limited. We'll talk more on this later. And last, but certainly not least, like most financial processes, these are susceptible to personnel change. With changing people and changing methodologies, it's difficult to nail down a consistent process, let alone improve on it in the next cycle. But having said that, these processes are not in fact the same, and we'll need to take into account the key differences when determining if this product is a good fit for this process. So to start, arguably the most obvious difference is the difference in the data and the teams. The nature of this data is different. So our typical bag of tricks that an ARCS consultant might use in a standard implementation, it may not work here, as it's not totally apples to apples. Additionally, although the process is consistent, the frequency between them may be different. And this is a current factor in why many companies do not take their PCM reconciliations seriously enough to purchase a systematized solution for them today. It's difficult to justify the cost if the process is only done once a quarter, let alone once a year. Compare this to the financial close reconciliations, where it is mandatory to complete these monthly, if not daily, depending on your industry. Which brings me to my fourth point, that due to this frequency and criticality, streaming the financial close reconciliations becomes an obvious candidate for cost savings for all companies. This level of seriousness may or may not be relevant for all profitability and costing teams. However, in certain regulated industries like utilities, this is not an option. The recons must be done right. And furthermore, while the auditors may not explicitly require justification as often, when they do, the issues have usually gone too far already. Oh, and one other point, the correctness of your profitability and costing reconciliations can affect your bonus, so many managers are highly motivated to make sure the numbers are accurate. But perhaps this comparison is putting the cart before the horse. So before diving into the specifics, we need to lay the groundwork for the PCM process. So step one, when we're dealing with PCM data, we're dealing with the income statement, or perhaps a subset of it, such as corporate expenses. We pull this data from a number of possible sources. Perhaps this is planning data from EPBCS or PBCS. Maybe these are actuals from the general ledger, or perhaps these are even post-consolidated data from the consolidation systems. The point is that the data typically originates outside of the application and is then pulled in. Next, allocations happen. And before the PCM team rages at me in the comments below, I will admit that this is criminally oversimplified. But to detail out true PCM design requires this, and a bit of this, and a lot of this, so this is what I'm sticking with. Just remember, it is a leading practice to never create or destroy data in PCM. Don't do it, it's a bad thing. The third step is we push the post-allocated data back to the systems. This could be the same originating system, or it could be a different target application. The point is that the data typically goes somewhere else after. So, in a nutshell, our first step, pull pre-allocated data. 2, run the allocation rules. And 3, push the post-allocated data somewhere else. Should be easy, right? Where could something go wrong? The answer, of course, is everywhere. Reconciliations in this process can take place both within the process and outside. But for the sake of brevity, let's take a look at one of these sections. Let's take a look at the reconciliations in the allocation process. The first type of reconciliation we're going to look at are called variance analysis, or period over period comparisons. When certain accounts pass a threshold of change across periods, say 25% or 50%, from January to February, this difference needs to be justified. So remember, this is the precursor to putting costs back into another system. So it's very important that these fluctuations actually make sense, because willy-nilly pushing the data back is not going to work out. Now, out of the box, PCM does not have any obvious reconciliation solution for these types of reconciliations, nor does it have a place to put this commentary. So today, most of the time, this is done in SmartView, or perhaps it's done in a Financial Reporting Studio report. And while these tools are flexible, there are some issues with reconciling the data in this manner. So using our reconciliation solution criteria, let's see how SmartView and financial reporting solutions stack up. And please know these are my personal opinions, so if you disagree with me, leave a comment down below if you think I'm crazy. Also, remember, we are talking about the reconciliation process in PCM, not the allocation process, and this is very important for framing our conversation. So, to begin, let's start with comprehensive, and we can definitely say these are comprehensive solutions. SmartView is able to easily pull data from within PCM across periods, so there's no problems there. Also, these solutions can be tailor-built, so they can really hone in on exactly where the problems lie. This gives us focus in the reconciliation process. However, after these two criteria, the benefits get a bit dicey. I'm going to give these solutions a ½ point in traceability, because while the data source is easily traceable, in that SmartView allows you to drill down to the specific loaded intersection, unfortunately, the reconciliation and how it's performed isn't easily traceable. If a manager changes how the reconciliation is performed across periods, a user can't go in and determine what exactly has changed, especially if your report administrator has left. Similarly, these solutions only get ½ point for communication. While writing comments in SmartView, Excel is all fine and dandy, this isn't enforced, and there's no easy structure that can be placed when talking about commentary in these reconciliations. Preparers and reviewers are usually forced to talk through email or instant messenger or even offline phone conversations, which aren't even documented. Now, there is the option of using annotations in Financial Reporting Studio, but these can be cumbersome with a bit of a learning curve if you were to really use this feature to be an enterprise-wide solution. But while these problems aren't easy to overcome, the feather in their cap is that Financial Reporting Studio allows batching, which means that reports can be easily sent out to the different business units. And this reduces the number of back and forth exchanges that needs to be done and is a noteworthy feature, enough to give it the ½ point. But as for these other three categories, while SmartViews will sometimes be downloaded from a shared drive as a starting template, this is not the same as having a true central repository. The reconciliations are often prepared offline and then require an email update or manual updating to the shared drive version. Thus, in this regard, the solution fails to be a centralized solution for all applicable reconciliations. Additionally, access to these reconciliations is rarely enforced, and there's no method to assign them to an individual user or a team beyond plopping them in a named folder within the shared drive. And even then, it typically requires outside communication to let the users know when they're responsible to actually do something. There's certainly no automated email updates here to keep the users accountable. And lastly, managers do not have visibility to see how far along the reconciliations are in their completion, as everything is usually done offline. So while there are some benefits to the current SmartView and Financial Reporting Studio solution, primarily around flexibility and formatting of how the data can be seen, there are some serious shortcomings as well, particularly around individual responsibility and overall process tracking. But let's talk about another type of reconciliation performed in PCM, top-of-the-house validations. When data is run through the allocation routine, it is vital that all data is accounted for. There are a lot of moving parts to this process, so it is essential that the various data elements eventually find a proper home. Now, out of the box, the primary tool for this are the rule balancing reports, and these reports are excellent. They show the data coming in from source systems. They show the ins and outs in the allocation routine on a per rule basis, and they show the net change all in one place. And this is very important because, you guessed it, it is a leading practice that PCM does not create or destroy data. It only moves it around. And while this is not what happens in all cases, this is a consistent design recommendations across multiple PCM implementations, and therefore this type of reconciliation is critical to ensuring that what we end up with after the model has run equals the amount that we started with, that the parts equal the total. So how does the rule balancing report and the subsequent SmartView reports built off of it stack up as a reconciliation process? Again, we're not talking about the allocation process itself, but rather the tools available to reconcile the results of the allocation process within PCM. So let's start with the benefits from the last solution. You remember these, right? From our SmartView and Financial Reporting Studio solution from the variance analysis reconciliations. Now, unfortunately, since the current process does not include Financial Reporting Studio reports, we no longer have the ability to use annotations or batching, which were the only systematized solutions that we had for communicating between the workflow users. Without this, the preparers and reviewers will have to use email or instant messenger or other offline methods like phone conversations and meetings in order to have the back and forth necessary to complete the reconciliation. And furthermore, within these rule balancing reports, we're combining Essbase information with data from the Oracle repository, which is a blending of these two worlds. The end result is that we can't use either data set exclusively, which further stifles our ability to easily document communication among the different parties in one place. So we'll have to say goodbye to our half a point there. We'll also have to reduce our full point in comprehension to half a point. While this is not true across the board, there are situations where PCM simply doesn't have the data points needed to reconcile the data within the system itself. Drivers like FTE that don't align with the financial data prevent the rule balancing report from unequivocally being a one-stop shop solution for all your reconciliation needs across the entire application. But there are some big benefits that we get through using this out-of-the-box report, one of which is a centralized solution. All rule balancing report views are in one place within PCM, which gives all the preparers and reviewers a central repository to turn to for the live reconciliation of the data. We also have to give a standing ovation to the rule balancing report's ability to provide visibility to the preparer. This shows you exactly which rule did what, and furthermore, a manager is easily able to pull the report to see each rule line by line. There's a lot of detail here, and it's all in one place. But despite these big benefits, and I will say they are big benefits, this solution still lacks the ability to truly assign reconciliation accountability to a user, as well as provide them with a method to document their communication about changes made or about justifications to the balance. I anticipate there's going to be some pushback in the comments on the half a point that I gave to traceability. While the current process in the rule balancing report does an excellent job of providing data traceability, it doesn't do a good job of tracking process traceability. That is to say, if how the reconciliation is being performed changes across periods, there's no easy way to monitor that or keep track of these types of changes. And this is an important component, especially when we're talking about changing methodologies, not just across periods, but perhaps across years. While this report does a great job of supporting the data and showing exactly where the data is coming from, the reconciliation process itself just isn't easily documented. But variance analysis and top-of-the-house validations are not the only types of reconciliations performed in PCM. So let's take a look at a third type, which is process-specific validations. Now, these can vary wildly across applications since they are tailored to the purpose of the application. But the point of them is to validate whatever specific allocation processes have been built based on the customized dimensionality. What is important from a reconciliation standpoint here is that it varies from industry to industry and even company to company. How the information is looked at and even what auditors and management are focusing on is different across businesses, and therefore the reconciliations must be built to reflect this. So how are these reconciliations typically performed in PCM? Well, unsurprisingly, a customized process requires a customized solution, so the reconciliation templates are often built in Excel, the tool of ultimate flexibility. And this brings us back to the same pros and cons as the variance analysis reconciliations, the first type we had talked about, except again, without the communication benefits that came from the batching process in Financial Reporting Studio reports. So when I was introduced to these reconciliation processes, my reaction was, I know this story. This sounds so familiar. We can see the data, but we're having difficulty getting the end users to actually own it. And managers are struggling to see the balance justifications all in one easy-to-see place. We already know that these problems exist in the general ledger side, and it sounds like we're not alone. So here's another option. What would it look like to put these reconciliations out of their offline SmartView processes and into a systematized solution like ARCS? Well, you don't have to guess. We built it. So let's take a look at the results. Diving right in, this is the reconciliation page, and it contains a centralized repository of all of the reconciliations for the period. If nothing else, ARCS is very good at putting everything in one place. Reconciliations can be tagged with an attribute, such as process, which can help determine what type of reconciliation is being performed. For this demonstration, the variance analysis reconciliations have all been tagged with GL validation as the process value. Opening a reconciliation itself shows a bit more of the meat. ARCS can be set up to display the balance for the loaded period and compared this to an indicated variance analysis period. So in this example, we're performing a month-over-month reconciliation, but it's also common to see quarter-over-quarter, year-over-year, and even in some cases, comparisons to last year's last period. Also, the graphical representation is a nice touch to quickly understand trend. And while all this is well and good, it isn't the whole picture, so we can only justify half a point for comprehension, as we don't yet have a place for the additional detail needed in the reconciliation. But what ARCS does very well is put people's names on things. Reconciliations can be assigned to specific preparers and reviewers, or even teams if that's what your company needs. Emails are automatically sent out when a reconciliation has been assigned to someone, and even more importantly, when the reconciliation is going to be late. Providing a system of accountability is one of the areas where ARCS shines as a workflow tool. One of the issues that the SmartView solutions we've discussed run into is capturing the supplemental detail on the various data elements. And while ARCS doesn't provide this to the same extent that FCCS or the on-premise supplemental data manager tool does, the system attributes, as well as the various custom attributes, can be designed in a way that they are more than sufficient to account for most reconciliation processes. We can confidently check off the remaining half a point in comprehension with this. Now, a headline-worthy benefit of ARCS, and one that specifically relates to the current PCM reconciliation process, is that of commentary. Comments can be placed nearly anywhere in the ARCS reconciliation. This is a screenshot of a summary-level reconciliation, but comments can be placed on individual transactions and even on remediation plans. Also, the name, date, and timestamps are nice touches for auditors and managers, and they provide a place where dialogue can be easily found and referenced in the future. There's no more chasing down emails in the archives or trying to remember that phone conversation. Though, be careful about what you write, because the system administrators can always turn off the ability to delete comments. Another feather in the ARCS cap is the ability to link with completed reconciliations in a prior period. What the company gains is an easy-to-follow history of how the reconciliation was performed, something that all of the reconciliation processes we've discussed so far have lacked. And this can reduce the risk that comes with personnel turnover. A new process with new people, this is not a problem. The preparers have a reference within easy reach, which allows them to easily see how the reconciliation was performed in the prior period and how they should perform it in the current period. And though this feature alone isn't enough to give ARCS a full point in traceability, it is a step in the right direction. One of ARCS's biggest appeals compared to traditional general ledger reconciliation applications is the out-of-the-box ability to auto-reconcile low-risk accounts, such as in the example here. and PCM applications would be able to utilize this same functionality. They're no exception. However, there are differences in how this is used. Most notably, reconciliations of the general ledger balance sheet accounts typically require the unexplained difference to be a big goose egg, 0. This is much more rigid than what many PCM applications require. So for example, look at this variance analysis reconciliation. On a P&L account, it's fair to expect that there will be some fluctuations across periods. What is not okay is a dramatic change, but depending on your requirements, 50% or maybe even 25% change, in those situations, the balance would need a justification, depending on the account. ARCS excels in these situations because the out-of-the-box auto-reconciliation rules can be configured to run off of a balance percentage threshold, like in our example, or a specific amount threshold if you prefer. Both of these are standard and commonly used features. This gives ARCS a solid point in the ability to help preparers focus on the reconciliations that actually have noteworthy changes. Only the reconciliations that don't meet these criteria are going to show up in their to-do lists. This slide also shows us the remaining half of our traceability criteria point. Not only is there a link to the prior reconciliation, but every single change that's made to the reconciliation profile is captured here in the History tab. This is an auditor's dream. And furthermore, those blue numbers there, those are hyperlinks to the data source, which gives you the underlying detail residing in the data integration tool, Cloud Data Management. With both the ability to trace data and process changes, we can confidently put a full point in traceability. Rounding out our final criteria are the dashboards. Besides being able to view the workflow status of an individual reconciliation, the ARCS dashboards provide a method for allowing managers to monitor the overall process. This is a feature that shared drives and smart views, they just don't have. And it's a noteworthy highlight of ARCS's ability to provide visibility for the entire reconciliation process. Now, how the reconciliations are going to look like when they are converted from Smart View and placed into ARCS is going to depend on how the reconciliation is performed. Here's an example we've been looking at, a variance analysis reconciliation. In ARCS, we call this a different reconciliation method, and thus it requires a different format to be set up. Compare this to the top of the house validation, which has been set up using a balance comparison format, and you can see that these are fundamentally different and require different considerations during the application setup. In fact, deciding how reconciliations should be built is an important step to ARCS design. So let's take a closer look at the bottom example here. Although this reconciliation has the same look and feel as the ones we've been looking at, notice that there are some subtle differences in how this reconciliation is set up compared to the variance analysis reconciliation example. There are different adjustment tabs that are being displayed. Notice that the ability to adjust the general ledger data has been disabled. This gives the end users confidence that the starting point is correct. Also, the way the data is displayed is different too. The balance comparison format utilizes the two comparison columns so that end users can see that there are differences between the source system and the subledger system. Typically, a traditional ARCS application would have these as two separate data sources, but in this example, we are actually pulling different intersections from the same data source, the input and the balance dimension member values from the PCM application. Like we said before, anything that's blue is a hyperlink. So in this case, the ending balance will take an end user to see the detail loaded in Cloud Data Management. This isn't much different from the variance analysis example, except that there are two separate ending balances you can drill back on, one for each of the sources. Lastly, the properties page is a bit different as well. If you remember, our variance analysis examples were all tagged with GL validation process. This is going to be different than this particular reconciliation, where we've tagged it as a top-of-the-house validation. ARCS provides admins with the flexibility so that they can easily sort this information when they're looking through the different reconciliations. They can look at it by process or account type or any other custom attribute field that they've decided to put on the reconciliations. But how about a different situation? Here's an example of a process-specific validation. In this PCM application, we want to make sure that rule number 2, which is allocating data from corporate out to the other business units, is not creating or destroying data in the process. So we're going to use a summary profile, which allows us to perform the reconciliation of all the individual pieces as well as performing it together. This gives us a place where we can see all of the data. So what do? Is this a blinding endorsement to move all of your PCM reconciliations to ARCS today? The answer is, it depends. The reality is, both the current PCM reconciliation process and the ARCS application were developed for specific reasons. They both excel in different situations, and they have different emphasis. So let's take a look at them side by side and see if we can spot a theme. Quick note, and I need to reiterate this, we are specifically talking about evaluating the reconciliation process of PCM and not the allocation process. With that said, let's jump in. So in light of our criteria for a comprehensive solution, do either of these processes struggle with capturing all of the data elements in a reconciliation? Well, the short answer is no. PCM, since it's the tool that actually contains the data being reconciled, it makes sense that all of the data that it would be needed to perform the reconciliation exist in the tool, right? Well, most of the time, yes, this is true. But there are situations where some of the data points just don't exist in PCM. I'm looking at you, employee data. This can happen when the nature of the data isn't financial in nature, and therefore it doesn't have a logical home in the dimensionality. ARCS, on the other hand, can house whatever data is needed, but it's dependent on clean data integration processes being built and kept up to date. ARCS also doesn't really perform calculations on the data itself, so there is a dependency there that any of the process-related reconciliations be completed first before the data is actually loaded to ARCS, such as what we saw with the post-allocation rules. However, ARCS makes up for this by providing a place to systematize the input of the supplemental detail on the reconciliations, which can be done in the custom attributes, though the way the information is presented in ARCS is admittedly less flexible when compared to SmartView processes. Let's take a look at centralization. Do either of these solutions provide a central place where all of the reconciliations can be viewed live? Well, this is an easy one for ARCS, which houses and deploys all of the reconciliation profiles regardless of what type of reconciliation we're talking about for the respective period. While SmartView templates can be downloaded from a shared drive, which preparers can then use as a good starting point, managers can never be quite sure if the version they're looking at is up to date. But this is where the "it depends" can jump in. Certain reconciliations, which simply require checking a report, can be seen as having a valid central solution in PCM. We saw this earlier when looking at the rule balance reports. Still, I'd give the edge to ARCS here, as it can house multiple types of reconciliations, which we saw through the different format examples built out. Now, how about accountability? Do either of these processes provide managers with the ability to enforce responsibility of a reconciliation to the appropriate users? Well, it's worth noting that both tools control access to the applications themselves through role provisioning. If you don't have a license, you can't affect the data or the process in the first place. But as you may have guessed, this is another criteria in which ARCS shines. Not only does it provide you with the ability to create dynamic and customizable workflow, but it also has internal validations which enforce the segregation of duties. Reviewers can't approve reconciliations for which they are the preparer, for obvious reasons. I should also mention that both tools have the ability to provide offline snapshots to send to those who don't have access to the system, though I would argue that ARCS does this more easily. PCM can provide offline Excel spreadsheets, while ARCS can generate a report binder of all of the reconciliations for the period or multiple periods. And this includes the workflow timestamps as well. but as far as if the functionality just exists, it's a check mark for both of them. The next two criteria, visibility and traceability, are a bit tricky as they both have two distinct aspects. The first is the reconciliation workflow process, and second, the reconciliation data. And while it would be nice to have this as a clear divide, the reality is there's a bit of a blending of these ideas. And what you will see as we dive into these two criteria are that the tools excel at different parts of the two aspects. So, with that caveat out of the way, let's take a look at how visibility works in the applications. ARCS does an excellent job at providing the live status of each of the individual reconciliations, as well as the reconciliations as a whole, and it does this through the out-of-the-box dashboards, as well as the workflow tabs. Now, while PCM lacks the workflow aspect for the most part, it does do an excellent job to show the exact pathing of the data. Where did it come from? What calculations affected it? PCM does a great job at providing this insight. And we'll see that this theme continues into the traceability criteria. ARCS stores all of the changes made to each reconciliation profile. And this means if the manner in which the reconciliation changes across periods, this information is stored on an individual reconciliation basis. Furthermore, the links to how the reconciliation was performed in previous periods helps bridge any information gaps when new personnel join the PCM team. PCM, on the other hand, provides a clear tracing of what happened to the data throughout the allocation process, and the tool uniquely provides the ability to perform a point-in-time look. While ARCS can provide traceability to the data to a limited degree through cloud data management, it isn't as robust as in PCM. So you can see that the common theme for the criteria consistently show that ARCS will provide clearer insight into the status of the reconciliation process, but it is dependent for the data detail to be displayed somewhere else, either in cloud data management or possibly in the originating tool itself, like PCM. And this is different from PCM, which can clearly delineate the calculations that change the data, but it has limited to no ability to document why these changes happened or provide historical insight into how the process had previously been performed. Both tools have different areas in which they shine for these criteria. The next criteria is communication, and frankly, there isn't much to compare here. PCM doesn't have a native internal communication capability, so it's reliant on traditional methods. And while the Financial Reporting Studio reports do support annotations and batching, this solution doesn't cover all of the reconciliation types, so it only works for a subset of the work needed to be performed. ARCS, on the other hand, has designated sections within the reconciliation for users to provide commentary, as well as a handful of other tools such as reassignment requests and even custom attributes to perform this type of documented communication. This is one of the areas that ARCS showcases its value, given its focus on the workflow aspect of the reconciliations. The last idea to focus in on is focus. And remember, when we are talking about focus, we are weighing how well an application is able to take large data volumes of the many reconciliations that need to be performed and boil them down to the problem children, the ones that are really causing trouble. PCM's tools for assisting their end users in this endeavor is through custom reporting and data access. In this solution, the burden is primarily on the report writers. If the reports are well written, then ideally a reconciliation preparer can simply open up the relevant report and troubleshoot the issue. Furthermore, they only need to look at the data they actually have access to, which in and of itself does provide a degree of focus for the preparer. ARCS, on the other hand, provides this through the assignment and auto-reconciliation rules. We've already discussed assignment in the accountability section, but suffice it to say, when a reconciliation has your name on it, it tends to be your focus. Emails are automatically sent out when a reconciliation is assigned and available to the end user to actually do something. Additionally, ARCS natively provides the ability to set up auto-reconciliation rules on a per-reconciliation basis, and this allows the system to take care of the low-risk reconciliations so that only the high-risk reconciliations are available for review. So that was a lot of information. Let's take a look at this nice side-by-side table. Both tools provide a comprehensive reconciliation solution. ARCS is by far the more centralized solution, And it also does a better job of creating accountability for the end users. PCM just doesn't have a native way to enforce this responsibility. Now, when it comes to visibility and traceability, we need to evaluate how these tools handle process and data separately. As a general rule, PCM has stronger capability to follow the data from start to finish, while ARCS has a stronger capability to follow how the reconciliation is performed changes across time. ARCS's reliance on cloud data management also means that it has this tool's strengths and weaknesses. As for the communication criteria, this is another no-brainer. PCM just doesn't have a native communication platform for its end users, nor a place to easily document supplemental detail for the data. ARCS has both of these, and on a per-reconciliation basis. And lastly, both tools do a good job with helping end users focus on the task at hand. However, I would argue that the out-of-the-box auto-reconciliation rules for ARCS gives it the edge in this category. So as a business, which solution do you choose? Well, the answer is that you have choices. And choices are a good thing. The reconciliation processes in PCM, ARCS, and even in Excel, they all have benefits to offer. It's why these solutions exist in the first place. Your company's solution will likely be a multi-pronged approach in order to pair the right tool for the right problem. You're not stuck with the solution you have today. It doesn't have to be an either-or. But having said that, it is my strong opinion that ARCS does have a place in your overall reconciliation solution for processes outside of the financial close, like we saw with the PCM reconciliations here. And this is particularly true if your current solution suffers in centralization, accountability, and in the communication criteria, as ARCS has all of these benefits natively. In these types of situations, like taking the reconciliations out of the PCM process and putting them into a solution like ARCS gives us a real opportunity to innovate. American psychologist Abraham Maslow said, "I suppose it's tempting that if the only tool you have is a hammer, to treat everything as if it were a nail." Both clients and consultants are often tempted to force-fit a solution into the products that they know best. But these solutions, unfortunately, also come with a cost, and it's usually in the form of a lack of scalability or transparency or longevity. It is critical to understand when to use which tool in your toolbox. When you have a clear understanding of what the core values of your products are, solutions to issues become much more obvious and manageable. Question the normal course of business and ask yourself what would be needed to gain efficiencies in this process or patch up a pain point. Don't let every company's story be your company's story. And most importantly, don't be afraid to think outside of the box. Everything is weird until it isn't. Take ARCS, for example. We've just discussed how it can be used to facilitate certain reconciliation processes in PCM, but where else could ARCS be used? What about as a place to provide commentary on trending allocations? Or as a less expensive gateway to the PCM data for users who don't have application access? Or is there an opportunity here for reconciling zero-based budgeting applications? Not every idea is going to stick, but that's not the point. The point is to broaden your understanding of what the tools can do for you. And there has never been a better time to innovate. In 2018, Oracle announced that they will be moving to a product bundling pricing model, significantly reducing the barrier to entry for experimentation in the EPM Cloud product suite. And in case you were worried, yup, ARCS is going to be stuffed into every single cloud goodie bag going forward. Where this type of experimentation, like performing your PCM reconciliations in ARCS, would have been much more expensive by requiring additional product licenses, this will no longer be a barrier to entry. You already own it. There's no reason to not put it to work for you. This is an unprecedented change to the way that clients and partners architect solutions. So be clever, be creative. There has never been a better time to innovate, and there has never been a better time to rewrite the story.